Okay, our notes today are going to take us through the Declaration of Independence. We've covered a lot of material in this unit so far, going back to the French and Indian War and through the period of the Stamp Act and all the protests against British taxes. And we've been looking at the different groups in America who felt we either should or should not break away from England. You had the Patriots who felt we should, the Loyalists who felt we should not, and then you had the moderates who were kind of in the middle. They weren't happy with England, but they wanted to see a peaceful solution instead of necessarily breaking away and fighting for independence. But as we know, we do break away and we declare our independence. So we're going to take a look today at what the actual Declaration of Independence says, and a little bit of background, and then get into the different parts of it. So by 1776, the American colonies had begun to act more and more like a country instead of a set of 13 different colonies. We saw this with things like the Stamp Act Congress and the Continental Congress, the First Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress. More and more, the 13 colonies started acting like one united country. They had an army at this point. We had a Continental Congress, and the army had successfully forced the British out of Boston. We haven't gotten to that yet. We're going to come back and talk about the fighting, but at this point, fighting had already broken out. Remember, fighting had taken place around Lexington and Concord, and so the colonists are pulled together by these different issues. We've talked about in our last set of notes a pretty important pamphlet called Common Sense, in which a guy named Thomas Paine argued it was time for the colonies to declare their independence. Right? He said it was basically common sense that we should break away. And this is gives you an idea of kind of what we're talking about. Just a small booklet, right? This was an example of one that was published and would have been distributed all throughout America, trying to convince people that the time is now to break away. So in June of 1776, a guy from Virginia named Richard Henry Lee proposed to the Second Continental Congress that the time had come to formally declare independence from Britain. So the Continental Congress puts together a committee that included Thomas Jefferson to write up the Declaration. Jefferson did most of the writing, and it was approved on July 2nd of 1776 and printed on July 4th. So what does the Declaration actually say? Well, there are two main parts. The first part, and the part that most people are familiar with, is what's called the Preamble. It's the opening paragraph of the Declaration, and it lists the main beliefs of the colonists. It says everybody has natural rights, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It says that the government gets its power from the people, and importantly, it says if the government fails to protect people's rights, then the people can get rid of the government and put in a new one. This was an idea that was gaining in popularity at the time called the social contract, which we'll talk about a little bit more specifically. But basically, the government has the job to protect the people's rights. And if the government stops doing that, people have the right to get rid of it and put a new government in its place. The second part of the Declaration is a list of grievances, or reasons why the colonists are breaking away from England. So we said if the government doesn't protect your rights, then you can get rid of the government. And then in the grievances part, we're going to list a whole bunch of reasons why we feel Great Britain has not been protecting our rights. And there's a bunch, but we're just going to talk about a few main ones. One thing that it says in the Declaration is Great Britain broke up colonial legislatures, like they did in Massachusetts. Britain kept its army in the colonies against the wishes of the colonists. We didn't want the army here. They forced the army into the colonies. One that we're very familiar with, Britain imposed taxes on the colonists without the colonists' consent. Right? No taxation without representation. That's what the colonists kept yelling. And lastly, the point was made that Britain is waging war on the colonies, saying, putting the blame squarely on Britain and saying they are fighting against us. We are not to blame here. Britain has done all these bad things. Therefore, we are going to break away and form our own independent United States of America.